I'm glad to welcome you here. Our first event of QA Days community, and the topic is test automation design patterns. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Vitaly. I have more than 7 years of experience in IT. I'm big fan of test ops approach. It's kind of mixture of testing and DevOps, and also test automation. I'm working in Mobiquity company in Amsterdam as a lead QA engineer, and also I used to participate in different events like conferences, webinars, some workshops, and etc. Today we are going to talk about design patterns. Our agenda looks like next. First part is small introduction about what is pattern, why do we need to use this pattern, so maybe we don't. After that, there will be some practical part with examples and code examples. All the code will be in Java, but don't worry, all the patterns are applicable in different languages. So it doesn't matter actually. And third part, just a discussion about QA Days community, and this event is kickoff of this community. I'll tell you a bit why we organized QA Days, and that's pretty it. Yeah, let's start. Usually when I talk about test automation, I consider three parts of successful test automation. First part is writing good code. Second part, it's collaboration with your team. Of course, you need to discuss with your team members why you write this code. And third part, it's making a robust, scalable infrastructure. It's test ops part, for example, setting up the Jenkins and CI/CD pipelines, using Docker and something like that. Today we are going to discuss part about writing code, and I hope that design patterns will help us, and you, of course, to write a good code. So what is good code? First of all, code is compiled, tested, and works as expected. Second one, it's code should be commented and documented just to allow your colleagues to understand difficult parts of your test automation framework. Third part, code is readable, understandable for other team members. For example, following name conventions, code conventions, some standards, and so on. And the last but not least, code is scalable, reusable, and stable. And stable, actually, the most tricky part for test automation, because it's not enough to write auto test. You should write stable auto test. And I propose to answer first the question, what is design pattern? So design pattern, you can think of it like a already pre-made blueprint for some recurring software problem that you have in your system, test automation framework, in this case. And if you don't have any problem, so you don't need to apply the pattern just for fun, code for code. No, it's not that case. But if you have, so you can use some of them. And what are the benefits of these patterns? You can speed up a bit your development process because all the patterns already defined and it's pre-made. solution. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can take and apply the solution. And since it's well-known solution, it makes your code maintainable and more readable for your team members and colleagues. And you shouldn't worry about the quality of the pattern because it's already verified and tested solution. It was used before you thousands and thousands of times. As you probably know, there is one book, it's called Design Patterns, which is written by Gang of Four. It was written in 90s. It's a big, thick book. And frankly speaking, it's a quite boring book. And I should warn you that today's presentation quite technical. So it will not be very funny. It can be a bit boring. So if you're going to snore, just please mute yourself. And I will try also not to snore. There are three types of design patterns. Its first one is structural. Second one is creational structural. Let me explain a bit. It answers the question how to structure your code. Creational is how to create objects. And behavioral, how to adjust the behavior of the code. Just a short pause. Is everything all right and everybody could connect? Because I can see that there are some messages on Meetup that somebody asks for invitation code.
So far, so good.
Okay, let's proceed. So I propose to create our discussion today in the next way. I will make a short break after each of these sections. And if you have any questions, you can type and write these questions in our chat. And after each this section, I will try to answer 3 or maybe 5 questions just to keep the discussion alive and not to dig into this code examples. Okay, great. Let's start with first group. It's structural patterns. And first pattern, I'm pretty sure that everybody knows this pattern. And it helps us to describe the logic of your tested application. And it helps us to describe the form structural parts of this application. Also, it makes your test logic more readable and code more reusable. And it's applicable for testing the web, mobile, and desktop applications. The name of this pattern, of course, page object pattern, classics. I couldn't not mention it because it's the most popular pattern during the interviews, and everybody knows this pattern. So the idea of it, you can describe the elements and actions on your page. It could be a web page or it could be a mobile page as a object, as a class. And for creating this pattern, for creating these objects, you're using abstraction. It's one of the main principles of OOP, object-oriented programming. And there are a few tips how to use it. So if you have, like this example, you have some Google page. Just turn on your imagination. You have some Google page and you have a search input field. And if you don't need to use other actions on this page, don't create other methods for this. Just save your time. And Then after you created this page object here, that's the usage, you can create some instances of this page and then reuse as many times as you want. If your page, let's say, changes, there are some changes during your project, you should change the logic and, or for example, locator only in your page object class. So it makes you follow the principle dry, do not repeat yourself. The next one, it's widely used to build a domain-specific language. It's called the DSL in a declarative way. I can give you an example. The library REST assured in Java use this pattern. Also, it helps us to make the code shorter, and it gives us some structure how to call our methods of our page objects. It can be used in any automation framework part, and it's often used along with page object pattern. So the pattern has different names. I call it chain of invocations. Also, it's called fluent interface. Method chaining is the same. Let's take a look to the example. That's the example with page object class. And for example, if you have some meetup main page, that's the website where you registered to this webinar. And there are three methods of this page. There are three actions on this page, after which you remain on this page. You don't you are not being redirected to some other page. Like here, for example, you go to profile. You go into some different part of application. But let's talk about these three methods. If you are staying on the same page, you can return the same object of your page object pattern, page object, sorry, and you're returning this. So it means you're returning the same object. But for example, if you go to some other part of your applications, to profile, you can return the new page object. It's meetup profile page. And the chain of invocation of these methods looks like this, that you should create some new instance of meetup profile, meetup main page. Then you are calling all the methods which return the same object. And then you go to profile. And how you can break the chain, you should assign the value returned by this method to the variable. And then reuse already in a different places of your code. So that's the example how it looks with this pattern and how test looks without this pattern. And this one is how it's used in REST assured. So they used it for create some syntax is sugar. So here we have some when methods, then methods to emulate BDD approach. As you can see, also there is a chain of invocations. It's quite popular, so you can meet this pattern everywhere. The next one allows you to attach additional behavior to your objects. It's applicable in any part of your test framework. And it's called decorator. Let's imagine the situation that, for example, you want to add some custom logic to your web driver, to your Chrome driver, for example. You can create a decorator for WebDriver and extend the Chrome driver class. And then using other feature of object-oriented programming, which is called overriding, you should override one of parent methods from Chrome driver, add some custom logic, and then call method super. And usage of decorator is super easy. Just create new instance of decorator class and assign to as a driver, as a main driver, and that's it. It's quite useful for logging, for example. Yeah, and quite important notice that today I am going to talk about only patterns that I used in my career and I have experience with. Of course, there are some other patterns, there are some other anti-patterns, and we can discuss them in Meetup or Meetup.com website in our Q&As community. There's this discussion, and if you have experience with some nice patterns, you can provide examples also. The next one, it helps us to hide the complexities of the system and give the access to the interface of the system to the client. On the client, I mean it's test part of your test automation framework where you write the tests. It's applicable in API testing framework, and that's the example. So it's called facade. And let's imagine the situation that you need to test some API. Usually for testing this stuff, you are creating crude operations like get, post, put, and delete. And then you are implementing the logic of calling these methods. In a test body, you can use the facade as initiating the new instance and then calling all these methods without knowing the exact implementation of these methods. So I faced this in my career at my current project. So we found with colleagues that there was some issue with certificates for REST assured library. So what we did, we just swapped the REST assured to native Java client, and that's it. And client part, this one, doesn't know anything about the implementation. So we can swap the implementation as many times as we want. So a bit more abstract stuff. That was part about structural patterns that I used, and let's take a look to the questions. So what do you mean by tested solution in regards of test automation pattern? How can you just apply some pattern to your code? That's a good question. So you should apply pattern when you have some problem to solve. That's why I created this structure, the structure of my slides, that you have some problem and then you should apply the pattern. And it's the first part of my answer. The second part, that after the webinar, I will share the repo on GitHub with all the examples of the code and you can reuse them. Tested solution, I meant that these patterns were used thousands of times by other developers and testers, and you cannot mess, with some already predefined solution of this problem. Any other questions? I guess no questions. If you have any, just write in chat. Let's proceed. Creational patterns, and the first one of this section, it helps us to encapsulate objects creation logic. And it's applicable for testing cross-platform applications. For example, you have a web application and you have the same page structure and the logic in mobile web, and you are developing test automation framework, universal test automation framework, which will be testing the both parts. And you can apply page factory pattern. It will help you to encapsulate or hide the logic of creation proper page objects into factory pattern. What we should do here? We should create some interface. Let's say it's login page, just an example. Then you're creating classes for mobile login page and web login page, where you implement this interface. I just provided one method, which is called login. It's quite logical with username and password. And then you have your page factory, where you creating some conditions for creating your particular page objects. Here I created conditions for operational system for Windows or Mac, it's web, and iOS or Android, it's mobile web. And in case of web, we are returning web login page here. In case of mobile, the mobile one. And that's the example of usage page factory in your test code. You just need to call one method get instance for your page factory, and it will return the proper instance. So logic is encapsulated, the test looks more readable and it's shorter, which is nice. I also know that page factory is implemented already in Selenium, but it's implemented in a bit different way. You can encapsulate the logic of creating your finding your elements. And I know that somebody uses these annotations find by, and also there are some annotations like Android find by, iOS find by. And if you have experience with this pattern in this way, you also can share in the discussion on Meetup.com group.
In between, can I ask one question for the page factories?
Can we do it during the
Sure.
break? Just,
sure, thank you. Yeah. Sure, thanks.
So nobody is snoring right now. That's a good sign. Let's proceed. The next pattern allows you to construct complex objects step by step, and you can separate the construction of these objects from its representation. And you can imagine the example when you have, for example, really complex object. It's just can be just a data object with a lot of fields and different combinations of constructors. And it can be pain in the ass to create the instances of this object with different set of data. So that's why people figured with this approach, it's called builder, when you can, that's our data class, and we can create the instance by calling the methods for builder one by one, and we can populate our object with different set of data. And by the way, as you can see here, it's also a chain of invocations. It's widely used. And there are some nice libraries for Java who use Java. One library is called Lombok. It's also island in Indonesia. You can just create builder by adding some annotation, and it will automatically create all the logic for builder. Here, for example, you have the it's not a really complex object, but it has a lot of data, and you can populate your object with this data. And also, one notice from my side that I hard-coded some values in my GitHub repository and here in these examples, but it's not a good approach. If you want to store some test data, it's better to use some files to read from, like in CSV format, for example. Just not hard-code your test data. And this next pattern is about creating the only instance of the object. It's really well-known pattern. I'm pretty sure that you know this one. It's about creating the only one instance of your object, and it helps you to control the concurrent access, for example, to the shared resource. It's applicable for cross-platform, for testing cross-platform applications, and the name is singleton. The idea in terms of test automation, for example, you have some multiple, you have tests which you run in a parallel way, and you have only one database where you should do some preconditions and postconditions. But just not to create the mess in your database, you can create a singleton class which will have the access to your database, and you can manage like this the access to your database. So the idea, it's like a static variable, the same, just one instance of your object. So let's make a short break, just let people awake, and let's answer some questions.
Yeah, I had one question regarding the page factory.
Yeah.
I used with Selenium, and I mean, while running at the rate find by I'm using, but while running test runs fine. But when I do in debug mode, I mean, to load all the web elements, to initialize the web elements, it takes like hours, I would say, if there are 20 web elements. So have you faced this issue, or are you aware of this? Because
yes, I faced this issue, and I am pretty sure that you are using IntelliJ IDEA. Am I right?
yeah, I'm using IntelliJ IDEA.
That's the, let's say, flow of IntelliJ IDEA debugging mode. It takes just tons of time to debug, and it's not only about this pattern. It's also applicable for other parts of test automation frameworks and applications in general.
So, did you find any solution, or you?
Unfortunately, no. I have to live with this, as we all.
Thank you.
Yeah, some people say that page object pattern is very old and useless. What do you think about it? And are there any good replacement for page object pattern? There is one replacement indeed. It's called screenplay pattern. So you can enable more business focused approach, and you are acting as actors. So you have some actors, it's defined business roles. For example, you have admin or just usual user. And then we are asking some questions of this actor. So admin, can you? And then we should provide the feature which admin can do. And the admin should answer us. And this is a nice approach. It's used in Serenity framework. And I cannot say that it's we can use it instead page object pattern, but we can combine even these two approaches. And I cannot say also that it's really deprecated approach, because we have the still we have some abstraction, and we have some applications with some pages, and it all depends on implementation. If you can implement it in a smart way, so it's nice. And also, just a reminder, if you have the problem, you should apply the pattern. If you don't have a problem, don't apply it.
Hi, Martin speaking. I have a question regarding just as you said, like implementation and applying the patterns.
Yeah.
So as far as I understood, you need to apply the pattern if you have a problem. Isn't the total opposite way of the actual behavior? You should use the pattern in order to avoid the problems when you actually develop a test automation solution from scratch?
It depends on your experience. If you know that you will have this problem, you can prevent. But
we are talking as like speaking generally as developers who have experience. I mean, assumably in development and also in test automation. So my opinion will be that basically we should use a pattern in order to avoid the mess that can be created when a lot of people or how many QAs are working on test automation software and creating tests and developing code. So basically the patterns will help us in order to not to go to that direction. And one more question. You mentioned singleton pattern, development pattern.
Yep.
So can you please, from your experience, tell us where do you think this is more applicable? So in which part of the test automation framework we should apply the singleton pattern? For example, when we create the tests, when we want to create an instance of the drivers, when we want to run the tests, in which part of the framework?
First of all, I will answer the question about singleton, and then we'll share my thoughts about patterns in general. That first of all, you already, if you're using login in your test automation framework, you're already using singleton, because login by default uses this. You're gathering the information in one place, and then you are posting this, I don't know, to console or maybe somewhere else, to CloudWatch or some other system. From my experience, I used singleton for accessing database because we had a lot of concurrent tests, and it could create the mess in database because it was third-party also system, and we created this singleton, and it allowed to avoid, you know, this bottleneck from all the tests. That's what I remember from my experience. If I recall any other, I can share also in discussion afterwards. And about the patterns in general, there are some for sure which help you to prevent some problems. They are connected to test data management, for example. I will tell a bit later about it. And if we are talking, for example, about structural patterns, you can create your project and adjust your project and make it more structured and readable. And it allows you, for example, to share the test automation framework with developers, and they can read it, or other colleagues, and also they can read it and help you with your problem. So for sure, there are some patterns which help you if you still don't have problem, but you can understand that you can have this problem. You can apply this pattern beforehand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's, do we have any other questions? No, let's proceed. I will combine two sections into one. It's behavioral pattern and patterns about test data management. This one, behavioral, it helps us to create different logic for different platforms. You can encapsulate this logic, so you can hide this logic. And also it lets you to make your algorithm vary independently from the clients that use it. And it's applicable for testing cross-platform applications. And the name of this is strategy. I can give you an example that let's say you have mobile, web, and API tests, and you have different login feature implemented for 3 systems. Okay, it's covered with tests, it's tested, it's nice, but to test other features on web and mobile, you need to be logged in as a user. It's pretty common flow. And in preconditions, you can log in, and usually people implement it via UI. So if you want to log in as a user, you need to first go through the login flow and then proceed to other features. But we can implement it in an easier way. We can log in first with API and then proceed to our web or mobile clients as logged user already. That's the code example that we have interface with pay method, and then we can create the different strategies and implement the payment strategy interface. There are two strategies, like credit card strategy and PayPal strategy. So it's pretty common. And then when you want to use any of these strategies, just pass it as a parameter to your here shopping cart. The same method name pay, where you inside this pay you can call the this method pay of your strategy, and that's it. It makes your test also more readable. Maybe you should take a look at the experiment a bit with this pattern in your project. So I think it will be useful to take a look to GitHub repo that I'll share. But it's really good example with preconditions. I used this and it helped a lot. Data patterns that these patterns help us to make our test data more structured, and we can enable, for example, data-driven approach. So the first pattern in the group, it allows us to register already used test data. I can give you an example from my experience. We had one project, it was a mobile project, and we had access to third-party system. It was mail server, and we had created test users on this mail server, so Exchange server. We had only the limited number of users, and since we had to test different platforms, mobile, on Android, mobile, and iOS, we had a bottleneck with the amount of users. That somebody uses this user, I need to ask, hey, you guy, do you use this user? No, okay, I'll take it. So it can be easily managed by a code, and it's called object pool. This pattern called object pool. You can create your test user factory, where you add some logic of creating these users, and you can provide some limit that if you have only 100 users, for example, you cannot use more than 100, but you can reuse them afterwards. In your test, you should first of all in preconditions borrow the object, so take the object from your pool, and in post conditions you should return this object to this pool and let other tests reuse this test user. So it's just an example about test users, but you can implement for any other test data. Next one, it's called, it helps us to enable data-driven approach, as I mentioned before. It's called data provider, and you have only one test body, but you have some parameter here, and you can feed a lot of data from let's say some file, CSV file, feed the data to this test and test some different I know boundaries, different edge cases, and instead of one test you will have hundreds of them. Each test automation framework for Java, like TestNG or JUnit, has implementation for test provider. I used here the example with JUnit 4. But I'm pretty sure that everybody uses it who use Java. Next pattern, it allows us to operate by objects, which helps us to reflect some business logic. Now, instead of testing some primitive types of data, we can test our entire objects. So, for example, in preconditions, we can create some credit cards, as here we have, and populate the object with some data. And then in test, we testing not the values, but we are testing the object as itself, the validity of this object. And the pattern called data access object, DAO, or value object in different way. So it's quite tricky approach, because you also need to understand the logic of your business application, and also you need to encapsulate the verifications in the correct way inside different classes, like here, verify credit card. There are different patterns and anti-patterns that I also wanted to share with you, but for today that's it. I propose to discuss the patterns and anti-patterns also in let's say offline mode, but on meetup.com, because I have some also to share. And the main insight of this presentation, that of course, if you have problems, or you can have the problems, you can use patterns to solve it. And that's the GitHub link where I shared all these patterns, considered and mentioned patterns in Java project. So if you want to, for example, rewrite with Python, that's also fine. Please share with us. And yeah, a few words about QA Days community, just a few words about community, and then we will switch to questions and answers section. The main idea is for this community is to help each other, share our knowledge and experience, because we are QA engineers, you are QA engineers, we can help each other, and, sharing your previous experience, right? And if you have any questions, you can create a discussion. Now it's open opportunity in this meetup.com QA Days page. Just create a discussion, and I think the community can help with a piece of advice. And also, I want to announce the next event. It will be about reporting for test automation, and my colleague Marin Onofre, he is experienced coach and trainer. He will tell us his recipe of the perfect test automation reporting. Yeah, and that's it for today. And let's switch to questions and answers, and let's talk a bit.
Yeah, I wanted to just put some comments regarding the when to use or apply patterns. Well, the most important thing is that people, when say problem, they mean something went wrong and they need to fix it. Usually problem means more mathematical term, which you have to do something. And by solving it, you need to apply, or to solve it, you need to apply some patterns. So you apply pattern not only when you messed up, but when you need to create something, and it's still applying and it's still solving a problem. And one thing, the most common used of the singleton is that you don't have before all hook, neither JUnit, neither Cucumber have it. And singleton will be the easiest way to implement that for you. That's to responding to Martin.
Yeah, good comment.
Yeah, and thank you for that one. And I will add just one more thing about singleton, which is very commonly used especially by myself, and that is when you would like to have multiple instances, or not to have especially multiple instances of one driver. And especially, as you mentioned, when you have a complex solutions like test automation framework, which needs to test web application on multiple platforms plus the mobile application on multiple platforms plus the web application. And in that case, we want to make sure what and in which time is being run, and which instances of which classes we have it at a certain moment of time. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for comment. And also, I've got some question about TDD approach. It's not a pattern, but it's more than pattern. It's BDD, TDD, and data-driven approach. It's like, let's say, approaches, yeah. And TDD, it's more related, I would say, to unit tests and integration tests, that you should first write tests for your application and then implement the application. And for test automation, it's not really applicable. It's really a rare situation that you need to write tests for your tests and then write test for tests. No, it's not the case, but it's not really applicable for test automation. So, who has any questions? Okay. Okay. Thank you all for spending your time, during such a beautiful day. It's really a nice sunny day in Amsterdam. And yeah, stay tuned. We will post today the announce of new event. It will happen 23rd of April. And yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Vitaly, very much. And see you at the next meetup.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Marin.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Have a good evening. Thank you. Bye. Thanks. Bye-bye, guys.